Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We know people are joining us from all different parts of the world, and we really appreciate you being here with us. I would like to welcome you back to our Water Productivity Masterclass series brought to you by the WaterPIP project. We are in week 4 of 6, and we really appreciate those who have joined us so far for weeks 1, 2, and 3. And if you're new, we also welcome you and hope you enjoy the webinar this week. I am Lauren Zielinski. I'm from IHE Delft, working on the WaterPIP project, and I'm joined by Abraham Abhishek from Meta Meta, and we will be moderating this webinar today. So for those who are new, the WaterPIP project stands for Water Productivity Improvement in Practice, and it's a project that is funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the goal of improving water productivity in the agricultural sector. So we're bringing together groups that focus on water science and water management for most of our activities. And these activities are being led by IHE Delft, Institute for Water Education, Wageningen University and Research, and Meta Meta Research and Communications. So we really appreciate you all being here, and we would like to know more about you. So if you could introduce yourself in the chat and put your name, the organization you work for, and the country. We're really interested to see where you all come from. And if you have been here before, you'll know that all of the participants will be on mute, but we encourage you to engage with us in the chat box. If you have comments or questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat, and we will collect them for the Q&A session at the end. So again, we are on week 4 of 6. So our first webinar focused on introducing the concept of water productivity and how to monitor it. Weeks 2 and 3, we focused on using the WaPOR portal for monitoring water productivity. And now we are focusing on a specific crop and with some case studies in Africa. So we're focusing on sugarcane production and water productivity issues around sugarcane production. Next week, we will learn about socioeconomic factors around water productivity, and our final week, we will be using AquaCrop to monitor water productivity, which is another open software from FAO. And if you would like to rewatch the webinar from today and download the presentations or find additional information, you can always go to the project website. So that is waterpip.un-ihe.org, or you can go to the waterchannel.tv and you'll be able to find the information from there. Or, if you would like to see the information from the previous weeks, you can also see that information there as well. So please share it with colleagues who might have been unable to attend, and we're happy to answer questions as well through the website. So the agenda today is quite full. We have many colleagues joining us. So first, we will show a recorded interview from our colleague in the field, Abera Girma, and he's going to talk about the experience of producing sugarcane in Ethiopia. Next, we will hear from our colleague Taya Alamayeru, who will talk from the sugar industry perspective about different priorities, opportunities, and challenges. Next will be Professor Peter van der Zag from IHE Delft, and he will look at the implication of sugarcane expansion in a river basin context. Next will be Abebe Chukala, also from IHE Delft, who will discuss intensification versus expansion in sugarcane production. And then our colleague from Ses van der Hav, Martin van der Stucken, will talk about sugar beets. We'll start with a short video about sugar beet breeding, and then he will go into more detail about how sugar beets can help us with sustainable agriculture. And again, at the end, Abraham and I will moderate a question and answer session. So we will not pause in between the presentations, but if you have a question, please put it in the chat. Abraham and I will collect them and we will put them on the screen during the Q&A session and have our expert panel have a discussion about them. So I think with that, I'm going to quickly introduce the first video. So we'll be hearing from Abera Girma, who is a Civil and Irrigation Works Division Manager at the Wonji Shoa Sugar Factory in Ethiopia, and he's going to talk about his experiences from the field. The interview was done by our colleague Youssef Sharanet, who is a Meta Meta colleague in Ethiopia, so a big thank you to him for doing this for us. And please note that we did have to shorten the interview a little bit to fit in the time with our webinar, but if you would like to watch the full video, it will be available on the waterchannel.tv as well as the project website. So I think with that, we can start the video.
Okay, my name is Abarra Girma. I am working in Wenjishwa Sugar Factory in the position of Civil and Irrigation Work Division Manager. I am working here from junior level to senior management level for the last 20 years. The new factory capacity is double of the old two factory. It is 6,000 ton per day cane crushing capacity. Regarding to sugarcane, annually the sugar factory has a capacity to produce 1 million quintal of white sugar. But now, from year to year, we are planning 1 million quintal of sugar per year. We cannot meet the target. For example, in this year, we are producing 635,000 quintal of sugar. It is almost 80% of our target. Last year's also similar. Before last year's, it is similar. So our target is lay in 17 to 80% of target. We cannot still meet 100% of our target. This new development has very great impact on our development. In phase 2, Wolanchiti and Bofa area is planned. Somewhat we are in progress to construct a irrigation infrastructure, but due to very social, political, and other problems, we cannot meet that project accordingly. That project also affects our target. As a big in Sugar Corporation also planned 10 new sugar factory, both agricultural and factory. That also has a great impact on our target. In the way that there is a very great financial problem. Due to that financial problem, we are not able to purchase the required resources like fertilizer, herbicide, and other input materials according to our schedule. Due to that, our productivity of cane is reduced, then finally it affects our target. So both within the company and within the sugar company, expansion project affects our target. According to the irrigation network, there are 3 categories. The first one is the FAO irrigated land, which is owned by the state proper. The other one is pressurized irrigation system, which is owned by Outgrowers Farmer Association. The third one is hydro flow irrigation infrastructure. It's also owned by the Outgrowers Farm. There are 5 soil classes. According to the 5 soil classes, rattoning also different, fertilizer application also different. For example, the A1 soil category, which is black cotton soil, the first planting is harvested after 2 years, then the first raton after 1 year, then the second raton after 2 years, the third raton after 1 year. Then after that, it uprooted and the land is remaining as it is for 4 months. After 4 months, the land preparation activity is started. Then new planting is continued. So in A1, one planting season is 6 years. Planting 2 years, first raton 1 year, second raton 2 years, third raton 1 year. So it continue for 6 years. After 6 years, the sugarcane is uprooted and ready for the new planting activities. In A2, it is for 8 years. Then the light C1 soil cycle, it remain for remain to 10 years. After 10 years, new planting activity is conducted. The major difference is due to fertility of soil. The state-owned farm is, its fertility is very low. It needs more application of fertilizer. The WaterPIP one is, the soil type is very fertile. But as previously mentioned, we are put the same type and amount of fertilizer is applied in the state-owned farm and also WaterPIP. This is the main difference for land productivity. The second one is the system by itself makes the difference. In cultural practice, especially in application of water, in state-owned farm, we cannot manage the water application. It is similar to flooding, but the Duduta one is, it is more manageable because it is more technology system is applied. The WaterPIP also somewhat better than the state-owned. It is hydroflume, we can manage better. This one also make a difference for the land productivity. In the state-owned farmers, the company by itself arrange a rehabilitation project to rehabilitate the whole system, the irrigation, the mechanization, every system arranges the rehabilitation project. That rehabilitation project reduces or increases the land productivity by a certain amount. But we cannot continue that rehabilitation year to year. We are stopping that rehabilitation project at some period. So the problem is now also continue. That is one measure taken by the company to reduce the problem. The second one is our division also try to make some measures to reduce these problems. For example, we are trying to measure the amount of water entered to the fields. It also makes some differences, but we cannot meet our target. We are trying to line canals. By another words, we are trying to change earthen canals to concrete canals to minimize the seepage losses, and also earthen canals to hydro flow. But this also makes some difference that we cannot make now the target. So we are trying to make some measures in state-owned farms. Fertilizer application, we must upgrade your fertilizer application, your herbicide application, your water application. So the recommendation of the company is to improve our cultural practice, but still we cannot improve our cultural practice due to different reasons. In our state-owned farmers, water, the drainage of the farm by itself is silted up. So we are trying to upgrade our drainage facilities. That is our target. Also, we are conducting that activities, but our plan and our activity is not matched. We are not do according to our plan due to financial problem. So we cannot alleviate the problem 100%. By another words, we try to give paracetamol to our fields. The problem is continue with ours. Also, we are trying to improve by developing a checklist to follow up the cultural practice. At a certain time, we are stopping following according to the checklist.
Okay.
In our opinion, the center pivot irrigation systems is more productive than the others one. Because the center pivot irrigation system is less affected by human. A uniform distribution of water is applied in the sugar cane. So this center pivot irrigation system is more productive than the other irrigation system. Operational maintenance costs are different in different irrigation systems. For example, in center pivot irrigation systems, one person can manage one center pivot. In other words, one center pivot means 75 hectares. So one person can manage 75 hectares for 8 hours. In FAO irrigation systems, 1.2 hectares is managed per day per 3 persons. Look the difference. There is a great difference. That 3 persons one day, but one day 75 hectares 1%. This is operational. In regarding to spare part, the center pivot irrigation system needs almost zero spare part. The only one, maybe in some 2 or 1 month after the tire is reduced, we fill the air. Regarding to the drag line, we broken the sprinkler head. We are trying to exchange the hose. There is very difficult to manage in drag line sprinkler, and also we are investing many Ethiopian birds, in foreign birds, to purchase that infield material. So the center pivot irrigation system, operational and maintenance cost is minimum than the dragline irrigation systems. Operational cost of FAO is very high than the dragline and the center pivot irrigation systems. Regarding to water application, there is no any difference in any irrigation systems. Let's come to this state-owned systems. We can apply the water timely and required amount, and also in pressurized irrigation systems. The only problem one is application of this availability of electricity. In pressurized irrigation systems, mostly electricity are not available from the EBCO side. Due to that problem, we are not apply amount of water at a required time. But the state-owned one is we can apply the amount of water as required. There is sufficient amount of water in Awash for our company. We can get a sufficient amount of water, but a certain months, May and June, especially May, we face a shortage of water. Otherwise, we can get sufficient amount of water for our farmers. For expansion one, we are not have sufficient amount of water for expansion one. But the existing farmers, we can assure a sufficient amount of water from our. We have one weathering station in our state farmers. We are measuring temperature, both maximum and minimum, wind speed, humidity, relative humidity, and sunshine hours per day.
Okay.
But the problem is we cannot use these data for irrigation scheduling. We are trying to use the weathering data per 3 months. What about our irrigation efficiency? We are using the irrigation, the pump or the amount of water according to the weathering data. So day-to-day activity, we are not translate the data accordingly. That is the major problem. Regarding to these water measuring activities, we are trying to measure the discharge amount of water from Awash River only. In state-owned farmers, we are measuring the amount of water that is discharged from Awash, and also the data is similar. Wageti also similar, Wolangiti also similar. So we are trying to compare within a 3 months period this amount of water. Are you applying the water according to the weather or not? We are only compare this amount. Most probably the state-owned farm is use more waters than the required one. The other farmers are lesser amount of water is used than the required one. So we are measuring only at the input side, at the beginning side. We are not trying to measure the water within the state. We are not trying. Our company, basically regarding to this water, they are very challenging. Very challenging because starting from the assumption for or the value to give water is very less. That value, that assumption makes our effort less. Simply, the water is coming from somewhere, pass through our fields. We are trying to pump from that one. So it is a plenty. It assumes it is a plenty resource. We can use according to our desire. This is the assumption. But if we give the value to that water resource, if you give the value to water resource, we are trying to create some measuring structures, some means to improve that amount of water. Simply, the first one, the cost is very minimal, so we can pay for any amount of water. We are discharging many amount of water from Wash River. That amount of water is not using for sugarcane. It also loss through seepage, loss through misuse of human person. We are also paying because due to its payment is less, we are paying. So if we are paying, the assumption is we can use any amount of water. So this is a very challenging problem. That is why we are not plan to measure our water productivities.
No.
This is one challenging in our company.
So I would like to thank Abera Jirma for sharing his thoughts and his experiences on sugarcane production in the field. As we all know, it's very complicated to run big estates like that, and there's many considerations that go into it. And he makes lots of connections between the physical conditions, so the soils and natural rainfall, the operations and maintenance of the infrastructure, so around the different types of irrigation, but then also the motivation around the economics of water. But it goes to show that having more information about how to increase efficiencies could also help reduce some of the complexity around managing such a system. So big thank you again to Abera and then also our colleague Youssef for recording that interview. And if you would like to watch the entire interview, again, you can see it on the WaterPIP website or the waterchannel.tv. So now we will move on from the field to the sugar industry perspective. So Dr. Taya Alamayehu will talk to us about this in his presentation. You may not see him on the video due to the internet connection, but we're very excited to have him here. So thank you, Doctor.
Hi, Taya, you could begin your presentation now. Taya, do you see your, he's dropped out.
Looks like he might have been disconnected. Oh, he's back, okay. Hi, can you hear us? Are you ready to start?
Hi, Taya, could you begin if you see your presentation? Or let us know if you don't see it. Simon, could you start with the presentation?
Looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I think until we get Taya back, Simon Shavalking will start the presentation, and then when we get Taya back, he can jump in again. Simon, I think we're having a little trouble with your microphone. Well, Abraham, maybe what we can do while we figure out the technical issues, we can move on to
Yeah,
presentation.
Simon will be over here in a second. He'll be presenting from my computer. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Sorry for that, but yeah, the connection does sometimes stop. So whilst we're getting back to time, I would like to continue with his presentation about the larger picture within Ethiopia, development and operation of the sugar industry. I won't be able to say a lot more than the filled content of his presentation. What also already came forward from the interview with Abera was the high potential for sugarcane production in Ethiopia. As you may know or may not know, Ethiopia is blessed with a lot of hectares of irrigable land, a lot of water sources. But at this moment, actually, the total developed area of land, particularly with regards to irrigation, is still very minimal. For sugarcane, taking only 2.5% of that area. However, the government of Ethiopia is very much looking at several dynamics. One, a very quickly growing population, as well as a population that requires a lot more sugar, a population that is in development. We're very much looking at how can we expand production within Ethiopia and substitute import. So sugar development sector is actually one of the major sectors in which projects are taking place. You may have heard it through the news and publications that there's projects being established all over, factories as well. And potentially, and that is the idea of the Ethiopian government, it will very much contribute to the economy, also in terms of it being an export product. So there's high attention towards the sugar industry, the sugar growing. The policy that has been set out, because there's been a lot of problems in import, export. Policy that has been set out is really to manage the imports, which always have to be bought using that very valuable foreign currency, and to steer towards creating export. And again, as I mentioned, tackling the consumption within the country. The sector, as it is very attractive for investments. There's high potential for development, as I mentioned. Only 2.5% of the land has actually been developed. At this moment, actually last year, since 2019, the government has also started a policy shift with regards to the import-export, but more towards privatizing. As came forward from the previous presentation, all the current sugar production is state-owned, managed. And at this moment, so since last year, the government is really looking at privatizing the sector. Actually, since January 2019, 30 companies have shown interest and presented their profiles to work in joint ventures with the Ethiopian Sugar Corporation. This is just a quick overview of all the potential irrigation sites for sugarcane development. It's a large amount, I believe several of these have already been developed. But also overall, you can see that it really goes into the hundred thousands of hectares in terms of suitable area. With regards to the development status, so sugarcane has been cultivated by smallholder farmers since a long time, 16th century. With regards to large scale, since the past 70 years, so in the 50s of the last century, the experience started with commercial farming. It started actually at Wanji, so at the sugar industry estate where Abera was interviewed from. And it was actually started by a Dutch-based company. Back then, the initial production was 140 tons of sugar per day. In 2014, the status of amount of factories was only that there were 3, and they were producing 75,000 tons of sugar per annum. From a total of 28,000 hectares. I'll have numbers there a bit later. At this moment, 10 huge sugar development projects, Abera already mentioned, require high investment and are under construction in various lowland areas of the country. And that's an important point that I want to mention, is what Abera is actually reflecting on is that the new developments are very much impacting the current sugar estates and their sort of rehabilitation, so their intensification of produce. At this moment, about 103,000 hectares of land is covered with sugarcane under 8 operational factories. Production has passed 500,000 tons. And there is power generation, millions of liters of ethanol. So there's not only sugar obviously coming from sugarcane, but there's ethanol production as well. When all these projects, the 10 projects that are mentioned, are completed, the intention is that the sugar production is boosted to 3.9 to 4.717 million tons, and ethanol production would be 181 million liters. As well as that the factories would contribute to 709 megawatts of electric power to the national grid. The amount of labor actually involved is tremendous. There's 15,000 members organized in 70 sugarcane outgrowing and providing associations on 17,000 hectares of land. So back to the development of sugarcane. The government goal is actually to satisfy local demand and become one of the top 10 sugar exporting countries. As I mentioned, there is quite a lot of import going on. There's an increasing population and increasing demand, increasing wealth, etc. for sugar. And so primary goal is to satisfy local demand. However, the sector does have quite a lot of challenges to meet these goals. As I mentioned, the growing population has just meant that the sugar demand has not been able to meet the supply. And that relates to the implementation capacity, the finance available, foreign exchange, spare parts, as well as machinery supply, which also was highlighted by Abera's presentation, actually, that all the spare parts for the drag lines, etc., all have to be bought with foreign currency, and that is a very big challenge. Also a challenge is water shortage during drought years. Good to add. I mean, obviously we're presenting Ethiopia as a country that is very well suited for agricultural production, but there is the challenge of drought periods, drought spells. Also in areas that are being irrigated, salinity is a challenge, as well as waterlogging, or vice versa, waterlogging and salinity. This, as also highlighted by Abera, is due to poor management, water management practices, drainage, amount of irrigation, and the underlying soil conditions. There's high runoff in several areas in which sugarcane is actually being produced. And there's quite an amount of liquid waste or sewage from processing plants, which in turn affects river systems, right, where there's the effluent running to. Another challenge is this lack of improved technologies that can actually improve the existing production. Also looking at cane varieties, the challenge of prevalence of diseases and pests. And I think again here, also reflecting back, that finance problem is sort of a reoccurrent thing, right? What Abera also mentioned is that tackling diseases and pests, getting the modern cane varieties, etc., are very much a plan and a priority, but they are difficult in terms of implementation. From the numbers also presented from Abera, it is possible to cultivate 162 tons of sugarcane per hectare within an average of 15 months. There are plenty of suitable soils. There's adequate water, not considering the drought. And the average sugarcane production per month would amount to more or less 9 to 11 within Ethiopia, comparing that to 6 to 8 tons per hectare per month, which are common in other parts of the world. But as mentioned, there is a evident gap between the potential yield and the yields that are actually being achieved so far. Land productivity itself is dependent, so within Ethiopia, on the agroclimate regimes. So within Ethiopia, there's obviously different agroclimatic zones. This affects the length of cropping periods, also the different water and soil conditions. And with that, the sugar estates in lower altitudes are relatively more productive due to warmer temperature and more fertile fluvial soils, right, in the plains of various rivers. Although it is possible to produce, referring back to the figures on the previous slide, between 9 and 11 tons of sugarcane per month, poor land and water management practices are lowering land productivity of a significant portion of the current farms. With regards to water productivity largely depends on the zones again, soil conditions, and the irrigation water management, including the amounts of water, the irrigation technology, and the irrigation scheduling. And as Abera also already mentioned, this is really a challenge in schemes where we're only using, for example, FAO systems, as opposed to systems that are more manageable, like with hydroflumes or with drag lines or with center pivots. The water productivity one moment. So going back to back to the third point, the existing sugar mills, particularly in Wanji Shoa, the sugar mill that Abera was actually presenting, and another one which we are investigating, looking into as well, is Fincha. They do not attain the best, or let's say state-of-the-art design standards and efficiency. And although they are required to be replaced or upgraded in order to improve, as also highlighted by the research that has been conducted, the studies, as also highlighted by what Abera was mentioning. With regards to the application of WaPOR, managing extensive cane farm with conventional method is a big challenge. As Abera also highlighted, measuring water that is going in is possible, but within the system, particularly within furrow irrigated systems, it sort of gets lost, and it's very difficult to actually see where water is going. As farm size increases, modern management tools are available, and therewith also irrigation in fields is better manageable, and crops can be monitored more appropriately. WaPOR the online open source database using remote sensing products, can actually help in monitoring growth and looking at where there is stresses in plants, which could also be from diseases. So remote sensing in that sense, the WaPOR portal, yes, could be a vital tool for helping irrigation scheme managers such as Abera as well. And within Ethiopia, there's ample opportunity to actually collaborate with a lot of different partners. So the partners here mentioned are Wanji Shoa, the sugar factory, a list of other sugar producing industries such as Metahara, Fincha, etc. They would be very eager to look into the opportunity of looking at irrigation, water supply, the adequacy, the equity within a system. Actually, what was not mentioned by Abera, but Wanji Sugarcane Factory also hosts the National Research Center for Sugarcane Production. Well, with regards to the Ethiopian Sugarcane Corporation, was established in 2010. It plays a leadership role in the development, management, and marketing of sugar. So that's an important thing that I didn't mention. The corporation manages all the sugar estates, but it's also directly involved itself in the marketing of sugar and all its byproducts. So they are also the ones that are distributing sugar for consumer retail, as well as distributing sugar towards industries that need sugar. Yeah, that's I think what I can say about that. Also looking at the time, yeah, I think that is more or less what I can say. I hope that I've done a bit of justice to the Taya. He will be available also for questions a bit later.
Thank you, Simon, for taking over the last minute. I know Taya has been active in the chat, so even if he couldn't present his voice, he's still active in the discussions, and he will be available for the Q&A session at the end. So please let us know if you have questions, put them in the chat box, and we will bring them up then. So thank you again, Simon. And I think that's a nice overview of the industry level application of sugarcane and the expected expansions. But some questions that have come up already is, what does that mean for a river basin context? Where does this water come, and how does it impact other parts of a river basin? So now we will move on to Peter van der Zag, and he will talk about this topic shortly, if we can just, perfect, okay, yep. So Peter, I will let you, once it loads, you can.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a great pleasure to give this presentation. My background is irrigation engineering from Wageningen University. The first African river that I worked on is sugarcane dominated in Comati. And I did my PhD in Mexico on an irrigation scheme that also was dominated by sugarcane. So it's nice to take part in this webinar. Now, I was asked to say something about sugarcane expansion and its implications for water use in a river basin context. Now, I want to be a bit how do you call it? Can I move the slides myself? Yeah. Yes. The alternative title is Sugarcane Expansion, the Basin Manager's Headache. And that sets perhaps a bit the tone. Now, this is the overview of my presentation. First, some facts. Then I focus on four characteristics that are typical for sugarcane, with immediate implications for water management. And I will discuss a few options of how to resolve those. And I look forward to the discussion afterwards. This is the graph from FAO stuff. So we don't know how reliable these data are, but the green line is the yield in tons per hectare, and the blue line is the expanse, the area harvested. So you see a nice increase. There's an increase of 1 to 2% per year. The average yield increases, but very slowly. It looks steep, but it is not so steep. It depends on the scale. Now, in Africa, we see also the expansion of the area cultivated and harvested. But unfortunately, we see that there is a decrease in crop yields. So something has to be done. And then one more fact, perhaps of interest, the green line here is the sugar price, world market price. And the red line is the maize price for a comparison. So market price of sugar is very volatile. Now I turn to 4 characteristics of sugarcane that are important for water management. Most of the sugarcane is cultivated as an industrial crop, and I'll come back to the implications. We all know that sugarcane is relatively a large, water-thirsty crop. It is, of course, a perennial crop, and it is not a seed crop, and that is relevant. Now, first, sugarcane as an industrial crop. It requires a mill, and thus it requires some minimum scales of production. And typically, operations are centralized, typically through an estate. And this influences the social and economic relationships between the estate staff, the estate owners, the cane cutters, the outgrowers, oftentimes, as has been mentioned before, water managers, and others. Often, but of course Ethiopia is the big exception, sugarcane production has a colonial history and a history of forced labor and even of slavery. Currently, there are strong sugar lobbies promoting the production and consumption of sugar and sugarcane, and this should not be underestimated. There's a huge lobby in Brussels to fight against the tax on sugar. Although sugar is, in the European context, a kind of a pandemic, creating all kinds of unhealthy situations. At this moment, we have 5 deaths per day in Holland from the pandemic, COVID pandemic, and we have more than 100 related to heart diseases and things related to obesity. And further, there are all kinds of subsidies that distort the market for sugar and ethanol, which complicates matters. So this is just a bit of a background. Okay, we all know that water is a thirsty crop. We saw these incredible numbers for Ethiopia. I'm always thinking, okay, I'm 1.90 meters high, so I will drown in the water layer that is required for a year's crop for sugarcane. Sugarcane is a perennial crop. We have heard the raccoons. Typically, a crop is standing there for 5 to 10 years. This means that it fixes water requirements of the area planted with sugarcane for several years ahead. And that's a very important implication for basin management. And fortunately, sugarcane is not a seed crop. It doesn't need to flower before it can produce its food. Unlike, for instance, all the grains. So for the grains, you first have to put water on the crop before you can harvest anything. Not so with sugarcane, and this has an implication that during the yield formation stage, more or less 150 to 300 days after planting or retooning, you can do deficit irrigation with limited damage. Okay, implications for water management. The first 3 characteristics that I mentioned make sugarcane a headache for the basin manager. In particular, in closing basins where sugarcane continues to expand. And because it fixes the water requirements also in dry years, or even in dry years. Now, let's turn to some data from FAO again, now from Mozambique and Eswatini. And these are countries which have a lot of sugarcane, also on the Nkomati, which I've mentioned before. And you see that there is an expansion. Where's my? I can use this, or not? Oh, yeah. There's an expansion of sugarcane in Mozambique, and also in Eswatini, also known as Swaziland. Swaziland has very good operations, and you see they have high, stable yields of around 100 tons per hectare. And in Mozambique, it's really fluctuating, but overall increasing. Anyway, now I have to move to the next slide. Yes. In such closing basins, problems are inevitable during periods with below average water availability. as the flexibility is reduced due to the sugarcane because of its perennial crop and its high water use requirements. So what are options for water management to solve this rigidity in the system? You can only solve this by institutional and regulatory measures in closing basins, because the physical measures like putting more dams in is in most cases not any longer economically and practically feasible. So possible options for the basin manager: define a cap on the acreage of perennial crops allowed vis-à-vis the annual crops. Enforce deficit irrigation of sugarcane during droughts. And in times of severe droughts, allow seasonal transfers of water permits between irrigators of annual and irrigators of perennial crops, meaning that the perennial crop owners will pay a compensation to the annual crop growers to say, okay, forgo 1 year's or 1 season's crop, and I will give you so much money so that I can use your water permit. Okay, there are probably many more options, and I invite all of you to submit your suggestions to solve this problem. Now, in conclusion, these options are institutionally demanding and information intensive. They require strong and legitimate institutions, especially because often large interests are at stake in settings with large inequalities. And for instance, I hope I don't say anything wrong, that for instance in Swaziland, one of the biggest owners of the sugarcane estates is the king. So it will be quite difficult for a water basin manager to enforce, for instance, deficit irrigation in such a context. But it also holds for large companies who own sugar estates, who normally are very powerful and have large interests. And then the annual crop owners tend to have much less political power. Moreover, these options require reliable information at adequate temporal and spatial scales. And here, perhaps, WaPOR and similar products can really play a good role, a positive role. Currently, our water institutions are often not strong enough to seek innovative options, as I suggested. Try these out, learn, improve, and grow. Also, the legal system may even not allow certain options. In many countries, it is not allowed to temporarily transfer water permits from one permit holder to the next. So, my final conclusion is there's much work to be done, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was a really nice overview, and again, a reminder that everything is connected. So the water that we need for sugarcane has to come from somewhere else, and if we don't have enough, who's giving up their water, and connects to the politics and public health, and it's a really nice reminder that it will require many people and many different institutions and creative solutions to make sure that this industry is sustainable. And so something that kind of touches upon is, okay, if you have a sugar plantation or a sugar estate, how can you make it more productive with the land that you currently have? So making an intensification of your land, or would you like to expand the amount of land that you have to produce more sugar? So this is a topic that Abebe Chukala will go into further detail about, and using some of the data from the WaPOR analysis.
Thank you, Laura. Is my voice heard? Okay. Thank you also for the previous presenters. They give a nice presentation, and my presentation will be on intensification versus land expansion in sugarcane production. And I will, in fact, support my presentation with asking some questions. And also they will help me to guide the presentation that I will have till the end. So the first question is the increase in sugarcane production in Africa, is it from land expansion or is it from improving productivity? We already have seen Peter gave answer to this, but I will maybe still ask the same. And then the second question is, what is the potential for intensification on existing land? Is there any potential? The third question is, what is the implication of intensification on land use and water consumption? So to start from the background, also answering the first question, this is the sugarcane production in Africa. To the left is the FAO stat 2005, showing only the production in Africa, and to the right is for 2012. Maybe if we zoom in, we could see it in a larger picture. And then here in the left, you see some countries even either they didn't report, or maybe there is no sugar cultivation. But then in the right, in 2012, there is areas which start to cultivate. And in fact, if you see both graphs, the country in Africa with the largest sugarcane coverage is in South Africa. But well, coming to the main question, there is expansion. In fact, just comparing these two, only these 2 years, 2005 versus 2012, and based on FAO stats data, there is an increase in land expansion by 13%, 13%. And in fact, it's also increasing as we speak. The second presenter already showed, also from the FAO stats, Peter showed that there is an increasing trend in production. However, the productivity, again comparing those 2 years from FAO stats data, is almost stable, or even showing on average decreasing. So on average from 61 ton per hectare per year to about 59 ton per hectare per year. Then answering our first question, so most of the production increase in Africa is coming from land expansion. It's not really from improving productivity. But then the question is there a scope for intensification? So most of the next presentation and up to conclusion will focus answering those things, and also showing how we could analyze towards answering this intensification question. So for that, I zoom into one of the sugar cane producing country and also a scheme which is called Sinavana in Mozambique, and I will focus only on about 10,000 hectares of that Sinavana sugarcane plantation. In fact, this name already have been appearing in our previous webinars, so it should be very famous name, Sinavana. And in this area, in fact, about three irrigation methods are predominant. That is sprinkler, furrow, and center pivot. So the indication is there a scope to intensify within this area, which is Sinavana? This area have almost the same agroclimatic zone. It means that the potential to increase with a climate limit is, it's comparable, and also it's possible. So what method and data I have used to answer those things? So data from WaPOR data. For those of you who maybe who just joined this webinar, WaPOR is a FAO portal to monitor water productivity through open access of remotely sensed derived data. And then we used 3 layers of this WaPOR data: land class classification, actual evapotranspiration, net primary production, and also we supplement this data with local information, which is more about crop season, as well as the scheme boundary and the agronomic parameters. And then we calculated the seasonal water consumption and production using those data. And next, we calculate the water and land productivity, followed by identifying what is the productivity target in that area, and then followed by assessing the productivity gaps. And eventually, then we showed how closing productivity gaps have implication to the production as well as implication to water consumption. In fact, this is supported with calculation equations, which I will explain here. So the biomass in the x-axis here is calculated with the equation explained here in the box. And in the y-axis, we have the biomass water productivity. And if we plot those variables per pixel for the whole the Sinavana area, we see the orange clouds of pixels. And then from this, if we can we set a target? Definitely we could set a target, and in this case we defined it as a 95th percentile of both productivity, biomass as well as water productivity. And then here, where the two lines cross, is a productivity target. Then, once we have the productivity target, the gap was calculated by comparing this productivity target with a productivity at each pixel. So that gives us how much is the productivity gap. And eventually, we calculated the production projection as well as implication on water consumption. And here at the bottom of my slides, in fact, the whole activities in the green box are there, which will guide also what will be the result. So the next result is what is the land productivity. So the land productivity here plotted for 5 seasons from 2014-15 up to now. And all those bars showing the biomass ton per hectare per year. And the first 3 shows in the cluster the biomass at Sinavana for different irrigation technology, FAO, followed by center pivot, and then the whole scheme. And then the last column shows the yield of sugarcane for Mozambique, again from the Sinavana, from the FAO stats. In fact, the difference between those is not purely just it's a difference, but rather it's because the last one is talking or showing the yield, which it means after multiplying the biomass by harvest index. And also the difference is due to this report, that is the yield from the FAO stat for Mozambique is an average over the whole Mozambique area, which includes also rainfed. So this is the biomass, and as you could see, the variation is there across technology, even also the bar showing the standard deviation across space. So again, this land productivity across space, as you could see, it varies. So it varies from the smallest red, about 50 ton per hectare per year, to more than 100 ton per hectare per year. And also the graph in the right shows the distribution function of this biomass across the Sinavana. So it nicely shows the normal distribution, where also coloring the values which are above the 95th percentile, which we said they can be as a target or beyond those targets. So similarly, we plot for water productivity, and also this water productivity varies across space, and also the distribution also here shows the normal distribution. So with this, then can we identify the target? So to identify the target, we plot in the x-axis the biomass, and in the y-axis the biomass water productivity. And then, as I already showed, if we plot them, so if we plot them, then we can show nicely the relationship between those two, and also the target productivity, which is indicated by the dark star. So from this, of course, those dark stars, and I mean those pointers or spots which have productivity more than the 95 percentile are indicated with the green color. And in fact, they are also spread across the whole space in Sinavana. So those spots could be considered for one season as the target. And then, yeah, the productivity gap eventually could be calculated by considering the value of those targets versus the value at each pixel. So the productivity gap in the left is for biomass gap, in the right is the biomass water productivity gaps for 5 seasons, and also for each irrigation technologies. So as it is seen in this picture, the biomass gap is large under furrow irrigation compared to center pivot, for instance. Whereas the water productivity gap is very large or high under area irrigated by center pivot compared to area irrigated by furrow. So then, anyhow, having those gaps, then we calculated or we start to talk about what is by closing gaps. If we close those average gaps, what it implies. So we have this graph. In the X is again the biomass, in the Y-axis is the biomass water productivity, and it has now additional variable, which is the water consumption. Imagine this is water consumption per year. It's not even 12 months or 15 or 18 months. So we have the actual evapotranspiration in millimeter per year. And as you could see, all those pixels to the left, the reddish one, consume less compared to the dark green one. So by improving or closing productivity, we mean that either we move those pointers in the horizontal to the right, which is following arrow 1, then it means that is closing productivity gap, also then consuming more water. Also, it can be following pass 2, which means we follow this, since they have the same or almost equal evapotranspiration, it means it is possible to close the productivity gap without any implication to additional or without any implication to water consumption. And there is also a possibility following arrow 3, which is a vertical move, where it is possible even to save water while closing productivity. So then, if we close those productivity gaps, what is implication to the production? So the implication, well, this is already included, indicated per year, the average gap. So there is a possibility to harvest more than 100,000 of ton per hectare per year, I mean ton per the scheme per year at Sinavana. And also this has in fact implication on water consumption, and it might consume about 13.4 millimeter cube, and also a possibility of saving about 1.4 millimeter cube. In fact, this saving doesn't mean that it is saving which could be reallocated for other area or for other sectors, because it's a moisture within the root zone, which can be also green water. But if it is a blue one, then there is a possibility even to save the water from the water withdrawal and to apply it. Imagine this water consumption, either additional or saving, is just only comparing the existing irrigation scheme. Because there is a possibility yet to increase the productivity, for instance, by consuming less water than what is indicated here. For instance, if we are applying mulching and other soil moisture conserving practices, interventions, of course, still the consumption are expected to be less and maybe the saving more. So this will take me to the final conclusion. So intensification at Sinavana by closing biomass gap can increase water productivity as well as production, and the production can be increased by more than 100,000 tons per year. This is in fact equivalent to producing from more than 1,000 hectares, or this implies even we are saving about 14% of the existing scheme if we are closing the productivity gap. But this comes with implication to water consumption, but this water consumption would be even higher if the production gain is coming from land expansion. So yeah, we are comparing this additional water consumption, but then I would expect to be less if I compare it, the yield is increased from the expansion. So subsequent studies could additionally consider, in fact, sucrose content rather than sugarcane, because this is also an indicator for, let's say, sugar production, which is the marketable product from sugarcane. And also it has to do with water shortage. Already Peter nicely said we could have the deficit irrigation. So it means it might have a positive implication to sucrose rather than just indicating there is a reduction into the biomass. So WaPOR plays an important role. In fact, we have seen this since the first webinar up to now, and it really bridges the data gaps, particularly the spatial details which are unavailable from the additional means of data collection, point data. The first presenter, Aberra Girma, already showed they have just one data center to predict, operate, and to do everything. So in such kind of cases, also for future expansion or planning, WaPOR could really play a pivotal role. However, validation and accurate interpretation of results, diagnosis of the productivity gap, and formulation of practical solutions can be made if WaPOR analysis and results are complemented with observed data and local information. So yes, we have nice data, and also let us check it, and let us also try to apply it. That's my final message, and thank you, and see you in the question and answer discussion.
Thank you, Bebe. That was a really nice review of how WaPOR can be used to determine the impacts of intensification versus expansion, and I think it's a nice tool that managers would like to have at their disposal. Next, we're running close on time, but next we're going to go to a short video from our final speaker, Martin van der Stucken, who works with Sus van der Haven. He's a global sugar beet specialist and a project manager for the breeding components of what they do, and he will discuss sugar beet breeding for drought tolerance and an example about rotation cropping with sugar canes. So first we will watch.
Ik heb eigenlijk van kindsbeen af al een grote passie en fascinatie voor planten. En nu een job kunnen doen waarbij ik eigenlijk met planten aan de slag kan en proberen meer potentieel uit planten te halen, zodat landbouwers er makkelijker mee kunnen omgaan en er meer winst kunnen uithalen, vind ik een hele fascinerende uitdaging. Planten hebben water nodig om te groeien, om te produceren. Een gebrek aan water, een droog jaar, kan opbrengsten in drastische mate doen dalen.
Water wordt steeds schaarser. De oorlog voor water, ik denk dat toch wel dichter bij de realiteit zit te komen. En we zien ook dat het klimaat grilliger wordt, de seizoenen worden extremer. Dus de variëteiten moeten sowieso robuuster worden. Suikerbieten die stabiel zijn, minder inputs voor stikstof, minder inputs voor water. Het is één strategie om eigenlijk suikerbiet competitief te houden met suikerriet. Die voor dezelfde suikeropbrengst te creëren veel meer water nodig heeft.
Je weet natuurlijk waar bieten geteeld worden. De bieten zijn vooral gelegen naar infrastructuurfabrieken in landen waar ze die gewassen telen. En je weet dat in bepaalde landen water beperkend is. En het klimaat verandert. Ja. Droogte steeds meer een rol speelt. Dat is natuurlijk de veredelen is kijken in de toekomst.
Een mechanisme is dat het gewas meer investeert in zijn wortelstelsel, dus een diepere wortelstelsel maakt, waardoor het eigenlijk droogte vermijdt door eigenlijk diepere waterlagen gaan aan te boren. Een tweede mechanisme is eigenlijk ervoor zorgen dat een plant minder waterbehoefte heeft of minder schade oploopt tijdens periodes van droogtestress. Het tweede mechanisme gaat eigenlijk zowel goed functioneren in droge omstandigheden als in geïrrigeerde omstandigheden om de irrigatievolumes te reduceren. Gewassen die eigenlijk niet inzetten op minder waterverbruik, gewoon efficiënter water kunnen benutten, dat gaat de irrigatiebehoefte niet reduceren, want die hebben nog altijd dezelfde behoefte aan.
Dus droogtetolerant terrassen gaan we vooral in gaan zetten in semi-aride gebieden, gaande van West-Europa tot continentaal en Oost-Europa. Een ras met minder irrigatiebehoefte, dus een verbeterde efficiëntie en watergebruik, gaan we vooral gaan inzetten in geïrrigeerde markten zoals Spanje, Turkije en ook bepaalde markten van Noord-Afrika zoals Egypte en Marokko.
We maken hier allemaal combinaties van verschillende planten. Dus we gaan eigenlijk de mannelijke delen halen we eruit, dus zeg maar de stuifmeeldraden van een takje halen we eruit. En dan zetten we een donor, van een andere plant, pakken we een takje, die zetten we erbij. En zo maken we gewoon honderden, duizenden combinaties. Dus hier doen we het in het klein en het gaat steeds verder, kan je straks zien bij die kast in het groot. Hier is het zaad voorbereid en dat wordt allemaal in kleine plotjes. Een speciale machines hier op het veld gezaaid. En die zaaien we eigenlijk op een afstand van zo'n 8 centimeter. En die moeten allemaal nog met de hand op eindafstand gezet worden, op 20 centimeter. En dan krijg je allemaal kleine, al die rasjes, die rijtjes, worden dan waarnemingen aan gedaan en met speciale machines geoogst. Kwaliteitsanalyse bepaald in het lab. En zo krijg je allemaal gegevens. Op basis van de gegevens kan je de volgende stap.
Ja, ik herinner me nog een fijne ervaring met een boer in Italië. Italië had een heel extreem droog seizoen. Het was een van de weinige velden in die regio waar het gewas nog echt na de middag er nog relatief fris bij stond. En die boer heeft ons heel veel bedankt en ons achteraf laten weten dat zijn opbrengst fantastisch geweest was.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So after this little video, which was recorded a long time ago already, but I added a few slides. So I'm Maarten van der Stukke, plant breeder at 6 van der Haven, as you could see in the movie already. And I prepared a few slides showing a little bit more specifications on the other sugar crop, sugar beet. A bit on the work we do on drought tolerance and the progress that we make on that, and then a little sidetrack to our tropical beet concept, which we are rolling out in India, for instance. So sugar beet, it's not a perennial crop in contrast to sugarcane. So it's sown and then 5-6 months later the roots are harvested, piled up, as you can see there on the picture, and transported to the factory and processed for sugar extraction. Yields typically are 80 to 100 tons of root yield per hectare, and in some regions up to 140 tons, and in more stressful regions a little bit less. Sugar content is typically 15 to 20%, and this results in a white sugar yield at a factory of, let's say, 17, 18 ton on average per hectare of white sugar. It's also used as an energy crop, just like sugarcane. Most used byproducts are the leaves, the pulp, the molasses, mainly for animal feed purposes. Leaves also as an organic fertilizer. And like mentioned in the video, I think a big difference or a big strength of our crop is the low water requirement. So even in tropical regions or in regions with very high irradiation, it never exceeds 8,000 liters per hectare. So on average, the water consumption is about 3 times lower than that of sugarcane. And a second interesting characteristic of sugar beet is that it has a very small and simple genome, which allows for a very active and dynamic breeding. And this you can see on the graph on the right, which shows a bit of the history of sugar beet breeding. And then you can see that, we'll try to bring up this pointer. Here in the 1950s, the average sugar beet variety still yielded around 5 tons of sugar per hectare, while today, like I mentioned before, we are around above 15 tons per hectare. So that's the progress that we make, and we still achieve a yield increase, a sugar yield increase of 1.5% per year. And more in the last decades, we combine this increase with increasing more and more, or bringing in more and more disease tolerance to a multitude of diseases that our crop encounters. So sugar beet, it's grown in a bit more than 50 countries. The main areas are, of course, West Europe, Russia, USA. So it's often considered as the temperate sugar crop. But in fact, there are also substantial, significant growing regions in Egypt, Morocco, Iran, Chile, and in fact, even India. And in fact, those are the regions where the acreage is expanding mostly. Another thing that to bring to your attention is that sugar beet is mainly grown under rain-fed conditions. Only about 15% of the global sugar beet cultivation takes place under irrigated conditions. So that's also very different from cane. This means the fact that it's mainly grown under rain-fed conditions means that it gets exposed to drought, and sometimes severe droughts, like was mentioned in the movie already. And here the little bar graph shows the impact that drought-tolerant varieties and breeding for drought-tolerant varieties can have. So current drought-tolerant varieties, under a severe drought, they lose around 10% in root yield, while a regular drought-susceptible variety easily loses 30% in root yield. So that's a significant impact. Also important is that these drought-tolerant varieties can combine this drought tolerance with competitive performance under well-watered conditions as well. So this is an interesting angle from a breeder to further work on this genetic variation that already exists. And so we have intensified our breeding programs for drought tolerance as well. So there we start with identifying the best performing varieties under drought in the fields, heavily relying on remote sensing technologies also for that. And those varieties we take to indoor greenhouse screening platforms where we actually verify whether this increased drought tolerance is triggered by an improved water use efficiency rather than with an increased water uptake efficiency, because the latter, we believe, is not really a sustainable strategy because it will only further deplete the soil water availability. So we mainly focus on increasing water use efficiency, and we experience that this is possible without triggering any yield penalties or so on. So our goal is to further improve, and we are quite ambitious in this, further improve the performance of our varieties under these droughts, which occur more and more frequently with climate change. Then my last slide, I make a little sidestep to our tropical beets and a little bit on the adoption in the Indian cane regions. So what is a tropical beet? It is, first of all, a sugar beet variety that is adapted to the tropical climate, so high temperatures, also high night temperatures, compared to what you get in more temperate regions. And of course, if you move into new regions, you experience new diseases. Sclerosium, as you can see here, is on the picture, is a nasty example of that. So then we also have to develop and breed for tolerances against these diseases, and only then you have a variety that can sustain profitable growth in the new region. So the feedback that we get from the farmers that in India that have adopted our crop and started growing it is the short cycle. So with a cycle of 5 to 6 months in a subtropical or tropical region, you can achieve 2 cropping cycles a year. And the fact that you rotate crops also contributes to the maintenance of good soil quality, good soil integrity, which they also appreciate. And if you steer or you plan it well, you can steer your harvest towards a period when cane supply is lower, providing the factory with a prolonged supply of sugar bulk source material. Another advantage is that sugar beets, the wild ancestor of sugar beets, originates from coastal regions. It even grows on the beach, as you can see here on this picture, which means that by nature it has a high tolerance to salinity pressure. And like it was mentioned before, it has a quite low water requirement, which is very interesting, of course, from an irrigation perspective. And yeah, I also mentioned the breeding progress already, which is rather convenient, because if you run into some kind of agronomical problem, a new disease or any other issue, there's a very high chance that you can breed to overcome the problem. And then finally, so the possible cropping systems that have been explored and implemented in India, in the region where sugar beet has been introduced, is the most adopted system is one where between the renewal of a cane plantation, they fit in a sugar beet cultivation. So have a little rotation with sugar beets. Another possibility is that you combine sugar beet with another sugar crop, sweet sorghum, for instance. And the interesting thing about that is then you can combine 2 sugar crops within 1 year. And then the third option is what we know best from the temperate region, is that you rotate sugar beet with cereals or other crops. And in more southern regions, subtropical, tropical regions, this has an advantage again that you can do 2 croppings within one year and maintaining a better soil quality by rotating. So this was what I had to share. If you want to read a bit more about tropical beet concept and related topics, I can refer you to a brochure that our communication department made. It's on our website, and I'm happy to take further questions later on.
Thank you, Martin. That's a really nice presentation and a way to show that there's possibilities to diversify your sugar crops, and not only with sugarcane, but maybe changing the seasons with sugar beets or converting to sugar beets if it's more suitable to the conditions. So now I think I would like to thank all of the presenters. We're a little bit over time, so we appreciate everyone who's still with us. We will do a quick question and answer session, but if you have to leave, please visit our project website or the waterchannel.tv to see the question and answer session at a later time. So I think the first question talks about, I think, getting back to Taya's presentation. What would the source of water for the various developments of sugarcane? So would it come from groundwater or dams? I know there has been some discussion in the chat that it's mostly surface diversions, but what would that mean for water security for other sectors, for example? So if Taya is available, maybe he can. I'm available. I can. During this question, otherwise.
Can you hear me, Laura?
Yeah.
Hello, Laura.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello. Hi. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. It's a nice question. As I try to communicate, also my Ethiopian colleague was communicating. All the sources for the sugar plantation are from surface water, the big rivers. We have 12 basins. The sugar development projects are, as you said, they are in the lowlands. These lowlands are the convergence of lots of river flows, and also the sediment load is lying over the lowlands. So all the source of water for the mega sugar projects are the big rivers. It's all the surface water source. But there is a plan. There is a planned activity to use groundwater for sugar development in the future. In the GTP1 and GTP2, sugar was also in the plan to irrigate about 2 million hectares of land, not only for sugar plantation, also for kind of mixed culture. It's also in the plan, but not yet is implemented for sugarcane. That's my answer.
Thank you, Taya. We really appreciate that. I know as water becomes more scarce, it's always an in-demand resource. So having diversified sources of water is important. The next question, for the application of water.
It's a very interesting question, but I don't have an answer in my head. I'm not sure whether there is any plan, but there are a lot of works going on. In fact, I mean, partly as a research, for instance, there are already few publications which compared WaPOR in Africa. Even there is a recent publication that compared the ET of WaPOR across the whole Africa. Maybe I will check it and then try to send the link. Otherwise, there is no one from ours just immediately now that we are going to do it. But indeed, there are things happening.
Okay, thanks, Abebe. And the next question, I think, is for Martin. Can one and the same sugar factory process both sugar beet and sugar cane?
Yes, with some minor adaptations. Once you are at the juice level, the process is exactly the same. The pre-processing is slightly different, but there are companies who developed a hybrid system which can deal with both crops. The name of the company is the SMET. I think it's in the brochure that I mentioned before. So indeed, a cane processing factory cannot just start processing sugar beet. Some small modifications to the system are needed, but there are solutions that enable dealing with both crops.
Great. And then a question about
the first. I know. Maybe first, the second. How developed it is? It's available. In fact, for the tropical beet concept, we could build further on the varieties that we had already in countries like Egypt and Chile, and just further improve it a bit. So we didn't have to start from scratch. We just had to fine tune it for the local environments. And regarding the region in India, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to this. So my expertise in the company is the drought topic, the tropical beet topic. I'm not very much involved in. I can transfer the question to one of my colleagues who follow that closer and come back to you with an answer. So I don't know who asked the question, but you're always welcome to send me an email and I can follow up if needed. Okay, yeah.
And we can also put a link to your company website for information in the brochure as well. Next is more of a comment from Pooja, but she's talking about how, for example, in India, where they were planting sugarcane intensively, they're moving towards more diversified crops, which would improve food security and water productivity and flexibility in years of drought. I think this is a nice topic. I don't know, maybe Taya or Peter, somebody who's familiar with this topic, is this something that's also happening in Ethiopia, for example, or other sugarcane diversified crop patterns?
I find this very difficult to answer. But you see in the Inkomati, which I mentioned on the South African side, you have okay. What you see in the Inkomati, which is a river that is shared between South Africa, Swaziland, or Eswatini, and Mozambique, you have a lot of sugarcane, but you also have a lot of forest plantations, which are rain-fed, but they consume blue water, and you have a lot of fruit trees. So they are really locked into everything that is perennial, and so moving from one perennial to the other may increase the value, for instance, from sugarcane to fruit trees or something, but will still keep you locked in. So perhaps to try out a bit of these sugar beets, tropical sugar beets, could be an interesting experiment actually for the.
I do know if people are interested in this topic, it will be covered next week in our socioeconomics around water productivity, where Wageningen will discuss the trade-offs between different kinds of agricultural production and what it means for things like food security and water security. So I think it is a difficult question to answer, and it might be case-specific, but again, we encourage you to join us next week, as that we'll get into more details on that topic. So I think there were a few more questions, but I think we're about 15. Okay, let's do this. We'll have this as our last question from Pasquale. This is for Bebe talking about his analysis with WaPOR. I think we're in a realm of high precision agriculture.
Thank you, Pasquale, for the
this implies that you need a high.
It's an honor to have you here. In fact, we didn't really measure the degree of less accuracy, but what we did is that at least we have some sort of confidence with this data. We agronomically test if they make sense or not from 2009 up to now. And then we removed, or I didn't present the data between 2009 up to end of 2013. It's because, the error, at least we couldn't confirm from the agronomic explanation. But then directly answer to your question, just still the accuracy and the comparison need to be done. And I would recommend just only the procedure to be applied. Maybe Peter wanna say something, please?
Yes, because the plan is that your presentation will be triangulated with the crop yield data from the estate. But we haven't had permission yet to use those data, and they measure water application very badly in the Shinavani estate. But in all sugarcane mills that I know, the crop yield is very accurately measured, both the cut and burned cane, as well as the sucrose content per lot. And so that will be very valuable information. But so Abeb is going to share the paper as it is now with the Shinavan company, with the request whether they can also share crop data for certain plots, just to check the
Great. Thanks, everyone, for your answers. I think we're about 15 to 20 minutes over. If we have unanswered questions, we'll take a look at them and put them on the website and send them around to our expert panel for their answers. So again, we want to thank everyone that was on the panel for your presentations and your videos. We really appreciate learning from you today. And again, a really big thank you to our participants, especially those who stayed a little bit late for the question and answer session. If you would like to rewatch this webinar, you can go to the project website, waterpip.un-ihe.org or thewaterchannel.tv. You can also download the presentations, and we'll put up additional information on those locations as well. Now, when you exit the webinar, it will send you to the survey. Again, it's a survey that gives us more information about what you're interested in learning and who you are. And if you have filled it out already, thank you. You only need to fill it out once. But if you're new, we would really appreciate it if you completed it for us. So